Hi everyone, so this is the video I'm going to discuss, is our Western happiness fetish causing depression, on page 140, I'm sorry, 104. So this article looks at the idea that because now in Western society that there's a lot of pressure from social media and the people around us that we're supposed to be happy and fulfilled and maximizing the quality of our life all the time, that this is actually having a negative effect on us, that it's making people feel more depressed, that it's making people feel that the response to this pressure, that it's, and it's not pressure like someone you're living with saying you need to be happy, but it's like when you turn on the TV and people are riding in new cars and going to the shore and going to, out to dinner and dancing and seeming so happy as they spend money, as advertisements seem to push us towards, that we feel like we're missing out because we're not part of that. So that we internalize that and think, why is it that I am not like them? And this is putting pressure on us, and it's actually our, as the article says, our happiness fetish, this obsession, this singling out, this need to be happy, is having this reverse effect and making us depressed. So here are the questions. This is, where is depression most prevalent? It's actually more prevalent in countries that have a higher standard of living. And of course, this is counterintuitive because you would think that the more wealth and prosperity your culture and your group has, the more happiness you would feel. And that is not the case. That depression levels are up in Western cultures, and of course this is all pre-pandemic stuff, that people are not as happy as the amount of money they have should indicate. What is the thesis here regarding the impact of placing high value on happiness? So the idea here is that the more we value that you must be happy, and the more that we're saying don't be sad, the worse you end up feeling. And the article points out, which I think is really an interesting thing, in paragraph 4, this makes our negative emotions, which are inevitable and normal and quite adaptive, seem like they are getting in the way of the most important goal of life. So it's interesting to point out that when you feel sorrow, depression, embarrassment, shame, that these are guilt, these are necessary things, doubt, confusion, because this is what helps you adapt to what's going on in society. You become a better person by recognizing, when you experience failure and disappointment. So in all these cases, you're not happy, but you learn from that experience and then you adjust to thrive better at being a more accomplished person and hopefully arrive at more fulfillments. But if you're always trying to must be happy every day, be happy, 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 you're doomed to fail, and you're not recognizing the positive qualities that you get from being sad and recognizing your disappointment and so forth. So I think that's an interesting thing, and people can certainly write about that. From this perspective, sadness is no longer an expected feeling you have when something goes wrong. So the article goes on and talks about the fact that there's all this pressure on people that it makes the depression worse. So in page 105, there are 3 studies that the article points out where they're trying to get at evidence of this. So I think, I know people like to go through all the questions. What is the change in how we regard sadness? Why does this matter? So I think I just kind of explained this, is that sadness is a necessary quality. It enables contemplation, and we adjust ourselves. But our change in regard for it is that you must not be sad. People around us are quick to be, don't be sad, you're ruining it for the rest of us. You're bumming us out. And then this puts pressure to be happy. And then for question 4, page 105, there are these 3 experiments that they ran. What did they tell you? So the first experiment talks about that the more people expect you to be happy, that the more that diminishes your well-being, that there's pressure on people to do that. The next experiment they talked about is that when you do feel sad or you do feel upset in a situation where you're expected to be happy, you then feel disconnected from the people. You feel like you can't be yourself because this is how you feel, and it's out of sync with what is expected of you. And then another one of these experiments that they did found that the pressure itself to be happy would even if you weren't feeling particularly sad over something, but just having that pressure to be on and to be bubbly and to be for everything to be okay is in itself a cause of why people do feel depressed. So again, obviously, people should read this in more detail for themselves. But those are the conclusions that these experiments, came to. So it's an interesting thing overall. The whole article, that it's a paradox, or rather, it's counterintuitive, which is because that's a better way of saying it. That the more we seek our happiness, the harder it is to get to. So some of my essay topics, which I think reveal some stuff about the articles, let's talk about that for a second. Oh, and then there's a question, what is individual level agency? So it's an interesting thing because this article talks about how there's an epidemic of depression. And if the conditions of the culture are causing people to be depressed, then how much individual level agency does a person have? So what it points out is that, like, similar to the idea of whether a person is overweight and there being an obesity epidemic, and it's an interesting thing to see that comparison. So on one hand, or that every individual is responsible for his or her own health, and we all make individual choices when it comes to what we eat and how we have nutrition, how we take care of our bodies and so forth. But when there's clearly an epidemic of obesity because there aren't food supplies of fresh, healthy, nutritious food in neighborhoods where the obesity rate is high because there's so much McDonald's and other fast food that people are eating because it's easy and people are on the go and it's cheap-ish and people don't have the training to cook properly and to know what to eat. Well, then it's not your individual fault, or is it how much so? Because it's an epidemic. Similar, or how much can you say, wait a minute, I make my own choices and such. Well, similarly, if there's an epidemic of depression and everybody's feeling depressed because we're all getting inundated with social media and the pressure amongst each other and moods are contagious, then what is one individual supposed to do against a wave of all this in order to make oneself happy? And then person, well, hey, I have my free will, I can fight back against that. So again, this also is an interesting topic in a variety of ways. How much is the circumstances, the culture, the cause of who we are and what we feel in various ways, whether our moods or our physical health and so forth, or how much of it is one's own responsibility. So that's what the individual level of agency talks about there. The article talks about how depression is perpetuated systemically through the culture. Write an essay that explains how another influence or effect on what we as individuals. So this is what I just said. This idea that, sorry for blurring out like that, but this idea that it's not just obesity, it's not just happiness, depressed, but that the culture around us has impact on us, maybe in some other way that you want to write about. What can an individual do when the huge contributing factors to one's personal problems is environmental, and there isn't escaping from it? And environmental means the human environment that we've created for ourselves. Sometimes you're stuck. How do you handle it? And clearly, in this pandemic, we're all stuck in how we're feeling is so much created by the circumstances we're in. What's a person to do is now that's a very clear example of something like that. The article explains the idea that our preoccupation with happiness has negative consequences. If this is the case, how should one regard the aspiration for happiness? What motivational state should one aspire to? What should be prioritized in how we live? So again, it's interesting to think, if not prioritizing being happy, what should it be? Fulfillment, in terms of fulfillment, taking care of children, being of service. How does one see oneself, you know, as having a purpose if your purpose is not simply enjoyment of the moment as joyfully as possible? Okie doke. I hope that helps. I'll post this as soon as possible. Thank you.